don't have that issue.
I just received a text message from Mayor Ramsey. Um, she needs to be excused. She's out of state with family, and she says she'll connect when she can. So um,
Okay,
we'll look for her.
sounds good. All right, well, I think we've got 3 board members now, if I count.
Well, my thought is we should get started. I'd like to be respectful of people's time, and as Alan mentioned, taking any action is a bit downstream, so we can get started and see if we can gain a quorum as we go. So let's officially start the meeting. We'll call the meeting to order. For members of the public, my name is Lowry Snow. Representative Snow is, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Land Authority Board. So the board members that we have, welcome, and those that are going to be joining, we'll appreciate their attendance as well. We also welcome members of our staff, our consultant team, members of the public who may be watching live, and of course they're always invited to attend via live stream as well. I want to thank you all, and especially board members, for taking time for this, what I call a interim meeting. It's a work meeting. We are, I think, as all of you know, at a real critical stage in our planning process. And in order for us to go forward, it requires some decisions being made by the board. In the working session today, and again on April 7th, we're going to be reviewing the planning that has been conducted up to this point, and get input also from Alan on progress of our working groups, our stakeholders and advisory committee groups, and also from the public, and take all that into consideration as we move forward through these stages. Muriel, I think you were here. I wasn't able to join in your virtual open house, but I understand that it was well attended and a lot of input there. So these working sessions lay the foundation for us to be ready to provide direction on the elements that should be included in the preferred alternative of our plan, so that we can fully address these issues and make hopefully final decision on our April 13th meeting. So this meeting and the one on April 7th really sets the stage for action on April 13th. And up to this point, we've heard a lot of, or we've seen some general type plans, but we're going to really start delving into some specifics, and I'm really looking forward to the meeting. I should begin by reading, as is always the case, the meeting determination that allows us to handle this meeting virtually. So give me just a moment, be patient while I get through that. I, Lowry Snow, co-chairman of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board, have determined that the March 30th, 2021 meeting of the board will be held electronically without an anchor location. This determination is based on the following facts. One, Utah is currently dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been determined to, and which is determined to be a pandemic. COVID-19 is contagious and can be deadly to those who contract it, especially those of advanced age and underlying health conditions. Number 3, state and county public health officials encourage residents to limit the size of public gatherings, wear masks, and maintain social distancing in public places. Number 3, majority of agency staff and the members of the board are teleworking to avoid unnecessary contact with others. Number 4, the boardroom is insufficient to allow social distancing and reasonably safe accommodations of the board and the public. Number 5, the board uses an electronic platform which allows interested parties to view the meeting, hear discussions, and provide written comment. That determination was signed over on the 29th of March, 2021 by myself as co-chair. So with getting that squared away, we're now, I think, prepared to get into really the meat of our agenda. And so let me just say preliminarily with respect to this item, you'll recall at our 9th of March board meeting, we discussed, or we actually directed staff to further develop the process on how to engage the development community in our master planning process and return to the board for approval before issuing documents to the public. I felt strongly that this matter should come back before this working group to review the proposed request for expression of interest, to initiate the developer engagement process, and proposes that it be posted this week. So you have received in your materials, thank you, Cece, copies of that draft for expression of interest. This is an important phase in the overall process. This is how we get word out to potential developers of what we're doing so that we can begin to accrue interest, how that we can begin to have them respond as to whether or not they're interested, and also the first stage in qualifying potential developers. So with that, I'm going to turn some time to you, Alan, allow you to elaborate, or if you would please, on where we are and what's before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe I'd suggest we have now 5 board members, so we're still one short of a quorum. And if you want to take action on this, we may want to wait until there's a quorum there. But I'm certainly happy to go and give a little background so that we might be ready to act if we get another board member to show. How would you like to proceed with that?
Here's what I'm going to recommend you do. How many are we up to now?
We've got 5, so we need one more.
I'm going to ask you to kind of start to walk through, and if we add one more, we'll bring them up to speed, and then see if we can't take action on it.
Okay, thank you. So we have set this goal to ensure that we get practical input from the development community on our planning process and proposed deal structure. I think it's going to end up being a better document if it's reviewed by those that actually would have to construct it. But at the same time, we don't want to create any perception of favoritism. So at the board meeting on March 9th, we talked about a process that would thread that needle. That would be to send out a request for expressions of interest, which would be a formal process that would be open and transparent and allow us to enter into discussions with interested members of the development community. So you directed that we continue with that process and move ahead, knowing that time was a bit of the essence, and then come back to the board at the next meeting for an opportunity to share more details. So that's what we're doing now. The details are included in that draft that we sent around this morning, and I'm sorry for the late notice, but a lot of moving parts going on right now. Let me just walk through the process and see if you're comfortable with it. We've been working with RCLCO, SOM, with Steve, some of my contacts, and have put together a list of leading national and Utah developers that we will reach out to specifically. We propose that on April 1st, which would be Thursday, we would send the request for expression of interest to those leading developers, but also post it on the state site so that it would be available to anybody who's interested. And we would certainly encourage broad participation. We have set up a process so that if anybody had questions, following that issuance of the RFEI, that they could post those questions and we would answer them in a way that anybody could receive them. We would then ask that they submit their responses by April 12th. I know that's a short time, but time is of the essence if we want to get their input on this planning process. And what we're asking them for is pretty basic. It's information that we think that any of their marketing departments could put together in a matter of an hour or two, probably. So not terribly burdensome. We've requested some information such as background on major projects that they've worked on as master planners or development directors, master developers or district developers, what the experience of their team members is, a little background on their financial status and security, things like their willingness to explore creative deal structures with us and things of that nature. We would then take all of the submittals we receive, evaluate them relative to some criteria that we've set out in the document, and then interview as many of those qualified candidates as we can, starting in late April through May. And during those interviews, we'd share with them where we are in the planning process, get their input on the draft plan, see if they've got thoughts on how we could do things better, if there are kind of problems that they might see, something that from a development perspective would be a particular challenge, but also engage them in talking about what the deal structure might look like and how we could do it in a way that meets our collective needs. So following that, we would be able to take their input and inform the master planning process. After the master plan's in place, then we would be involved in actually selecting a development team. So that would happen not before late summer or early fall with an RFQ, RFP process that we would conduct with DFCM and check all of the boxes. So I guess I might suggest maybe two things. Number one, this is not a process to select a development partner. That will come later. This is a process to gather input in an open, transparent way from the development community on our planning. And maybe the second thing I would suggest is we're not asking you today to approve the document we sent out this morning. That's still being refined. JC's taking a look at it. We've been working with DFCM staff on it, and there are a few things that we want to adjust, but we do want your direction on whether we're heading in the appropriate direction for this. So I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and go from there. I think you're on mute, Representative. Sorry.
Thanks for reminding me. I haven't had a chance to go through it in great detail, but it appears to me that it's well done, and I appreciate you providing your comments about what the purpose of it is, and clarifying the fact that it's not time to select a developer, but that this is an early process to get the word out, but also to start receiving from these folks that have done this kind of work before, their input, and that some of that's helpful be able to incorporate. So questions from the board or comments about the process thus far? And I think Alan is correct. We won't ask for action, but take comments about the process and where we are thus far. Okay, seeing no hands, and no one speaking up, we'll move forward to the next item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is number 3, presentation of the stage 2 deliverables. And we're going to turn some time over to our SOM team in just a moment. Just by way of background for members of the board and for the public, we are undertaking a 5-stage process, planning process, to develop a framework, a master plan for the point, and we've projected and anticipate having that completed by this summer. Stage 1, we have gathered data and have identified opportunities and constraints. At stage 2, you've already seen some of that. We've created 3 planning concepts for the point, evaluate how they perform relative to performance metrics, and identify lessons learned to carry forward into the next stages. Stage 3 is to take the best elements of the concepts that have been developed from stage 2 and create a preferred alternative that becomes the foundation for our master plan. Stage 4 is then to refine the preferred alternative to optimize its performance and returns. And stage 5 is then to prepare the final framework master plan along with supporting documentation. Our planning team, led by SOM, and completed the second of the 5-stage in our master planning process. And when we turn time to them, they're going to share with us what they've learned through that stage 2 process. We should have time at the end of the meeting for your questions and discussions, but you should feel free to raise questions at any time during the presentation. And so with that, I'd like to recognize Pete Kindle from the SOM team to share your results and the results of your team with respect to stage 2. Pete, we'll turn the time to you.
Representative, maybe before we do that, we just got a quorum. So if you'd like to finish action on that previous item, maybe we could do that before going into SOM's presentation.
Let's back up and take that item up. I think April is with us now. Is that correct?
Yes.
April, thank you for joining. We've had a brief discussion. Alan took us through what went into the development of the, I've lost my notes, Alan.
And the request for expression of interest.
That, April, was the document that was attached to the agenda with the other documents for today's meeting. And Alan described to the board and to the folks attending what the purpose of that document was. We were shy a member, but we would like to see if we could take action, but we don't want you to feel rushed. And if you would rather us come back to that, we can.
Yeah, that would be great. If we could listen to SOM's presentation, then I'll review the notes and make sure I'm caught up to where you guys are, and then we can readdress it.
That's a great suggestion. So let's do that, Pete, and we'll have you proceed, and then we'll circle back to this item on the agenda for action.
Thank you, Representative Snow. Can you see my screen?
We can see it, yes.
Great. And it's great to be with the board again, and we're very pleased to be sharing our stage 2 submission, and I'll just go to a full screen mode. This material was completed approximately 2 weeks ago, and we've been reviewing it extensively over the last week, especially with the working groups. So I think some of you may have seen a little bit of this material, so I'll move through it fairly quickly, but please feel free to interrupt or stop me if you have a question. A key part of our stage 2 work was to develop the 3 alternative framework concepts, as Representative Snow mentioned. And I think, as you may know, we have structured these 3 concepts around different programming visions. The one on the left, what we call complete community, really looks at the potential for meeting the needs of the immediate surrounding area in terms of its land use mix. The middle one is what we call a regional hub. That is looking at the surrounding communities and understanding their needs and how the project can support those. And then number 3, the economic catalyst, is the widest ranging option in terms of its programming vision. We have kept the 3 options the same in terms of their density, but what you'll notice as I move through the plans is that the land use mix is different. So the option 1 on the left has the highest percentage of residential, and the one on the right has the highest percentage of commercial, 60% in both cases. And this becomes an important factor as we move into the evaluation criteria. So the first one, the complete community, again, really is what its name describes. It's an idea about how the point becomes a self-supporting innovation district that allows it to meet its own needs in the best possible way, with also supporting programming for the immediately surrounding area. And the byword here really is this idea of completeness, that the land uses in this concept really are self-supporting, that the residential and commercial mix is optimized to meet the needs of both the employees that live here, but also the residents that might be on site. It does have about 60% of the GFA devoted to residential and about 40% of the GFA devoted to commercial. And the structure of the plan is very similar to the design that SOM submitted as part of our selection criteria, this idea of distinct districts. So we're dividing this very large site into sub-development areas, essentially, that can be programmed in specific ways. And they're linked together by a linear open space system that would be contain trails and other recreational amenities for the community. The advantage of this particular strategy is it does allow us detailed programming of the individual districts to adapt to market forces over time. As you can see, generally the residential is oriented to the western half of the site, and the office uses are generally oriented to the east. Those are shown in blue. The residential is in the brown and tan colors. We also, in all of the concepts, have a idea around mixed use cores, which you can see here. So the pink and red indicate areas of mixed use. This would be commercial, retail, and other supporting functions, so that, again, employees and residents have the opportunity to meet their daily needs within a short walk of where they live. The retail idea would be something that might look like this, very sort of exciting, perhaps 2-story retail functions that have a heavy pedestrian focus. We also have designed the open space system, and in stage 2 program those open space areas to a standard that meets the needs of the surrounding communities. So again, you can see really two types of open space here, the linear greenways that I mentioned earlier, but then also in the middle of each district, the lighter green color are programmed community spaces that would have supporting functions that provide additional amenities to the people that live here and work here. And we understand from our research on other innovation districts that these amenities are extremely important to the success of innovation districts and really appeal to the tech workers that we're trying to attract here. The transportation concepts for all 3 concepts are really focused on reconnecting this site to the surrounding street grid. And we know that by doing that, we can reduce the traffic impacts on any one particular road. So in black here, you see the proposed road structure. And also in stage 2, we've introduced an idea of car-free zones between these roads. So this would be really a pedestrian-forward area that really develops this idea of walkability within the plan. The BRT, as we've talked about before, currently is planned to come into the site from the southeast and exit the site to the north. In this concept, it will go to the center of the site. We have 2 BRT stations shown by the pink circles. And then complementing that would be a secondary electric vehicle or autonomous vehicle network that links all of the districts together and brings people back to the center of the project. We also have spoken with the various school districts that are adjacent to the project, and everybody is very much in support of a school on the site. We're thinking this is a K-8 or K-12. And that's shown potentially in this particular location, though the location is not 100% confirmed at this point. We also did a massing test fit, we call it, where we just take the GFA and we make sure that it fits into the development zone. As I mentioned, this concept has approximately 55% of the land area devoted to new development, so quite substantial development profile. And we have also shown slightly increased building heights near the center of each district. So generally the project will be a 3 to 4 story project, but we hope and plan on certain portions of it being taller than that, 6, 8, 10 or even 12 stories in height in some areas. Concept 2 is what we call the regional hub. And as I mentioned, this is about a 5-mile catchment that touches and is influenced by the needs of the surrounding communities to a greater degree. And the 2 big elements that we added to the program of the site based on this wider catchment are a community park, and then also a more substantial retail core. We understand from our research of the surrounding communities that these are 2 needs that the surrounding communities are currently lacking. So additional retail and additional parks. This concept has a more balanced land use program. So now we have about 60% of the GFA being devoted to commercial and about 40% of the gross floor area being devoted to residential. So it's skewed a little bit more to the commercial side. The signature element of concept 2 is this very strong linear park that would make that regional trail connection that we've talked about from the Jordan River to the foothills of the Wasatch. And this really becomes the central defining element of the option or the concept. About 55% of the land area in this option is devoted to development, similar to option 1. But we do have a higher percentage of open space in this concept because we have added this community park, which you can see here in green to the northwest corner of the site. We also are showing that larger retail footprint, which you can see here in red, that I mentioned. This would act as a community hub, not just for this project, but also for the surrounding communities. And you can see here in dark blue, the institutional anchor, which is also a characteristic of concept 2. The cores and centers in the plan would look something like this. Again, this pretty significant mixed use core that has a significant retail focus in the middle of the project. And that would actually bracket the this regional trail connection, this linear park that cuts through the site. So we think that's a really exciting idea, that people can not only come here for dinner or an evening out, but also have access to that regional trail immediately adjacent to that area. And some of these, this larger entertainment retail center might look something like this. Again, 3, 4, 5 stories in height generally, but significant commitment to public space, to places where people can gather. There's a lot of energy in this concept with this larger retail hub. In terms of open space programming, concept 2 has a nice mix of the linear park and regional trail, which you can see here through the middle, but also the community park up here. We've shown some sports fields for scale. You can get a sense of how those would look in the plan. And then the lighter green color would be, again, these smaller district parks that could be programmed for either the employees that are adjacent to them or the residents that are next to them. So a fairly varied programming opportunity for concept 2. And that regional trail might look something like this. Again, a very significant community asset that would link the river to the range, and possibly even some grade separation where that passes under roads, so we don't have that conflict between bicyclists, pedestrians, and automobiles. And in terms of the smaller parks, the urban parks that are in each district, those might look something like this. Again, providing relief and amenity for employees, predominantly in the employment centers. The road network for concept 2 is approximately similar. Again, maximizing connections to the outside road network and identifying portions of the plan in the center that would be either car free or car minimized, with a focus on pedestrian activity in those zones. One idea that we're also excited about and had a good response is this active mobility corridor shown in yellow, which would link together the entire project. This would be a bike and pedestrian highway, essentially, that would unify the project and allow people to move through the whole project without having to move along a road. The BRT, again, is shown here. And what's interesting about concept 2 is the BRT would actually go through the commercial core. So it would be a slightly more traditional idea of a main street with the BRT on that main street. The institutional presence in concept 2 is significant. You can see it shown here in the purple color. And then we're thinking that the school, again, the location isn't finalized, but if it was linked to that linear park, that provides a way for kids to get to the school without necessarily having to travel along a road. This is what the test fit looks like. So you can see the footprint is a little, the development footprint, even though it's still 55% of the land area, is a little more concentrated because of that community park in the north. So this one has a distinct kind of downtown quality where the BRT would run right through the middle of that. So it's a nice connection between transit and density. Concept 3 is the economic catalyst. This also had a lot of positive reviews in our working groups last week, with the goal of a larger economic impact for the Wasatch Front. And the idea here is that concept 3 really becomes a third hub between downtown Salt Lake and downtown Provo, and can begin to take on many of the aspects of a downtown in terms of its development character. The byword for this concept really is maximizing development and generating the most possible job growth and economic footprint. To that end, about 60% of the development floor area would be devoted to commercial uses, with 40% devoted to residential. So this is the most commercially focused of the 3 concepts. The structure of the plan preserves many of the ideas that we've talked about before. However, because of the larger development area on the project, the green areas are slightly reduced, but we would still try and maintain that connection through the project to connect the river to the range. And then the development districts are organized around smaller district-based parks. The land use mix, as you can see in this diagram, is skewed towards office and institutional functions. So in this concept, we did move the institutional anchor to the more of the southern part of the project. And we've added a second, what we call an innovation accelerator, which would provide some focus to that northeast corner. The blue areas, again, are office development. So these two institutional and innovation hubs really begin to anchor and provide focus to those office districts. With a very prominent central park right in the middle of the project. So there's a very clear center here. And some of those institutional buildings might look something like this. This is a building in Mission Bay, California, which we studied as part of our analog project research, about 5 stories in height. So we imagine the buildings in the point, assuming that same sort of identity. Again, the cores and centers follow a similar strategy of dispersed cores, but you can see there's a major focus on the center here, what we call the project core, which would be the central park combined with a fairly substantial retail mix supporting that project core. We also think this concept, or any of the concepts, would also benefit from maybe a signature building. This we started to call the Hive. This would be a mixed-use building. This is a project SOM worked on in New York City that really brings together a lot of the innovation attributes, educational attributes, and incubator functions in one building. So it really becomes a signature building for the project. The open space programming for concept 3, again, is a bit more limited because of the reduced acreage of open space, but we still think there's a lot of programming opportunities in these, in the central park, of course, but also in these secondary parks that organize the districts and neighborhoods. And that central park, we think, really can be a key feature of the project. It would act as a civic hub for not only the project, but also the surrounding communities, a place where people can come, and there can be events here, different daytime activities with retail around the edges, very lively and active central park. And also we feel all of the schemes would benefit from green infrastructure ideas that begin to link development with water conservation, which we know is a important issue in the Wasatch Front. Concept 3 also lends itself to a highly walkable project core that would be organized around that central park. That could be, again, car-free or car reduction zone, with heavy emphasis on pedestrian activity in that area. And we envision that really being flexible in terms of accommodating local restaurants and other types of fun uses that would, again, amenitize the project. The institutional and education footprint would look something like this. And again, this concept 3 has the highest acreage of institutional and anchor tenant functions. And those buildings can serve a variety of functions. They can be education oriented, they can be oriented towards product development, R&D, lots of really, I think, exciting possibilities for this institutional zone. And concept 3 would look something like this in terms of its 3-dimensional character. You can see that the building heights around the central park could be brought up to a higher higher elevation to a higher height. And that would really provide a strong idea around a downtown core or a project core, which is very consistent, we think, with the overall vision of this idea of a regional economic catalyst. So those are the three options or concepts, and be happy to take any clarifications or questions on those three.
Questions from the board? Just go ahead and speak up.
Chair Snow, I have a question. Peter, this is terrific stuff. I was able to participate a little bit in the work group. I think it was last week, and you've refined this a little bit more, which you said you did, and it's really terrific. So one of the questions in concept 1, you reference specifically, and you go back to me and my concept by talking about smart communities. In concept 1, you reference specifically autonomous vehicles, and I reference back to my visit to Columbus, Ohio, a couple years ago. They had received a $40 million U.S. Department of Transportation grant to develop the smart city concept. And so when I was there, they had these autonomous vehicles, electric EVs. They were traveling on a specific course to get you from point A to point B. But I didn't hear you reference that would also, in your thinking, be part of concepts 2 and 3.
Yeah, Steve, thank you. It would absolutely be part of 2 and 3. We think this is a transferable idea between all the concepts, and it's absolutely something that can show up in all of them. Just for brevity today, I believe I did not show those drawings.
That's okay. That's okay. So my second, I'm glad. I mean, that would be just an amazing, not only sustainability initiative, but also a demonstration of what really the development, the city of the future could be, if you will.
Absolutely.
The second thing is that we have always talked about an innovation center as part of the development, but I didn't hear you speak about a carve-out area of an innovation center. I mean, we've kicked around this idea of a world-class air quality and climate lab, perhaps as part of the innovation district part of this. Could you comment, Peter, on any of that at all?
Yeah, and maybe I wasn't as clear as I could have been. We imagine these darker blue areas as being those innovation cores. And I think maybe I referred to them primarily as institutional hubs or institutional anchors. And I use that word institutional in the broadest possible sense. So it doesn't have to be a university. It might be a corporate partner that is interested in a presence here that has an innovation mission. And I know Alan has received some inquiries around different other types of innovation uses that might want to come here. So we use that term in the broadest possible sense. I would also,
if I could just jump in. This is
sure.
Steve. A little clarification. We're in the third alternative. There's kind of stepping stones as you go from alternative 1 to 2 to 3. And 2 clearly, has an innovation district that would have a innovation hub at its core. And that could be either single industry focus like biotech or software or some other thing, or it could just be a non-single industry sort of universal, innovation hub component. Alternative 3 is a little bit different in that it is taking the position that that we will probably be successful or hopefully be successful on at least one innovation district that really focuses on a single industry like biotech, for instance. And that would have its own kind of innovation sort of infrastructure that the wet labs, dry labs, conference center, the shared workspace, the kinds of things that an innovation hub would have, but probably be oriented towards that single industry. If you look on that plan in the upper right-hand corner, there's a second hub. And that hub would be more like what we see in other cities that are not single industry, but they're more multi-industry hubs that would still have conference space. There would be mentorship programs, there'd be capital access programs, there would be shared workspace opportunities, but it would be less of a single industry kind of focus. And so The third alternative goes the extra mile and saying we think we can probably achieve both types of innovation infrastructure.
Hey guys, that works for me. Thanks very, very much. Those were great clarifications. Very exciting. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Good.
And I think also for the board's benefit, actually all of the ideas can be transposed from one concept to another. In other words, concept one, even though we did not specifically call out an innovation hub, we could certainly take the innovation ideas from 3, for instance, and put them into 1. So please don't think of this as a choice between the 3, but what our objective really is to merge the best ideas from each of the 3 into what I'm calling concept 4, which is the preferred vision.
Yeah, the other way of saying that is, you almost, and this is a little bit of a thought challenge. It kind of stretches the brain cells a little bit, but you almost have to look at these in 2 dimensions. And one dimension is what I call the urban design structure of kind of how the open space, where the parks are oriented, what is the urban form? And then almost separate from that, the programmatic, component of, how much housing, how much employment, how much retail, because clearly you could say, well, we really like the programmatic components of alternative 3, but we really like the urban design structure of alternative 2. And there would be no problem of combining those 2 in the next stage of design. In fact, that's the intent of the work program, is to make those types of combinations of preferred elements.
Yep.
Other questions? I really like the concept of the river to range access and trail parkway. I'm wondering, was that concept? I'm curious as to whether that concept was discussed in the town hall and whether there was any reaction to that, if anyone knows.
I think that generally has been met with a lot of really positive response. I know that the public really supports that idea. And I think it also correlates very well with some of the key vision elements that the working groups have developed about collaboration with surrounding communities. And of course, the recreational component for all of Utahns, I think really that single idea probably had the most positive response out of almost any of the open space ideas. So yeah, it's been well received.
Thank you. And then Mayor Walker, that's still some distance through Draper to get to. I don't know whether it's some distance to get to your trailway system, but you have some thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, the BRT, causeway over the freeway should include obviously the connection, but once you land on the other side of the freeway where Pluralsight's building is right now, you're on the Port of Rockwell Trail. I mean, it ties you right into it. It's like it's the perfect landing spot.
Yeah,
that's great. That's great.
I just have one question, and Steve, maybe this is what you were trying to say. What would make me thrilled is to take 3 and take the park and 2 that's on the other side of what's really that power corridor, and just move that over to 3, have that open space for the big ball field, and make the buildings taller in 3 to accommodate for what you're giving up, with the concept 2 on 3. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense? Are you saying we can incorporate the park system, the bigger park on the west side of 2, right over, just move it over to 3, leave everything else on 3 how it is, except go a little taller to make up for it?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of discussion we want to have. And keep in mind that this is the first meeting we don't want you to feel pressure to start to make decisions, in today's meeting. This is an introduction. We've got a couple more meetings to walk through these. Pete has some metrics that he still has yet to show you on evaluating these. But those are exactly, and I think in our next meeting we're thinking about sort of breaking this down into key components, and actually maybe having some rankings, that you all can speak and sort of maybe vote for key components that you think are the highest priority. But that's exactly the kind of process we want to go through. I mean, we can mix and match as much as we want these different these different pieces.
And really, if you have that river to range concept, the Jordan River Trail, it's really right on the other side of Bangor. So I mean, it connects hundreds of miles of paved trail. Once you hit the Jordan River Trail, you can go Ogden to, all the way to essentially to Provo. You can come through here and get all the way down into Lehigh and on the Murdoch Canal Trail. So it provides amazing award-winning connectivity, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Just
Look at
getting across the freeway.
if you squint, all three of these schemes have that opportunity to do that. It's just different levels of emphasis.
But I think if we're going to have a park, we got to move it, keep the bigger park that you show in 2, but put it into 3. And that park could also involve bats and pretzels and hot dogs.
One of the things that might happen is if you actually did do what you're suggesting, the actual additional building height, the other option for where it would go would be over along the freeway, along the interstate too, because there's going to be a lot of demand from the office industry to increase density there as well. So that could be another option.
Great discussion. Any other questions or comments? Well, Pete, will have you continue.
Yeah, let me move on to part 2, which is the evaluation methodology. And this was a key part of the stage 2 work, was to create an evaluation process. And that generally was achieved by developing the framework plans that we just saw. We assigned then specific parameters to them, and then we performed different types of analytics on them. And the method which we used was to develop 25 evaluation criteria, which are shown in this middle column here, around these 5 general categories: transportation, community, sustainability, open space, economy. Somewhat correlate with the key vision elements, not exactly. And then we simply measured the performance of these individual criteria in a simple way by seeing which of the 3 concepts performed the best, and they were awarded a score of 3, and then which performed the worst, and they were awarded a score of 1, with the middle one getting a 2. So a pretty simple scoring structure, but because we evaluated 25 criteria, it gave us a pretty good picture of what the schemes are doing. And again, this isn't meant to be a decisive determination of which one is the best, but really to shed light on key attributes. So I'll walk through these pretty quickly here. But the first set of categories is the transportation category. We know this is quite important because of the impacts on the road network. And what we found in T1, which we measured daily external car trips, was that the concept 1, the complete community, was the highest performing, and that correlated with the intuition and the intention of concept 1, which was to balance residential and commercial uses, and that causes the daily external car trips to be minimized. And you can see it's about 22,000 fewer car trips than concept 3. The second criteria was a planning criteria called intersection density, and this really has to do with the porosity of the plan, what we call porosity. So the ability for someone to move through the plan in a relatively simple and unimpeded manner. In this for this criteria, concept 2 performed the best. And you will see in this analysis, some of these are simply design differences. So again, just like the land uses, we can create this design outcome on any of the 3 options, but in this particular one, concept 2 did perform the best. You'll also note we have provided a key takeaway up here in red text that kind of identifies what the lesson learned is. Criteria T3 is the daily internal trip capture. This is important because it, again, affects offsite traffic. This is the ability of people to meet their needs on site. And as we anticipated, concept 2 performed the best, and that is because it does have that bigger retail component. And what that does is it lets more people that live and work here stay on site to meet their daily needs. So that one performed at the highest level. In terms of car-free zones, which we think are very important in terms of the goal of the 15-minute city that we started this process with, this idea of a self-supporting project. Concept 3 performed the best. We think it has the highest proclivity towards having these car-free areas with that central park. And then criteria T5 was access to BRT stations. So this is an analytical tool where we were able to measure the development area, which is shown in the pink, and we were able to identify how many people and percentage of land area that's within a 5-minute walk of those 2 BRT stations. And in this case, they all did quite well, but concept 2 performed slightly better. And we think the reason for that is because of by introducing that community park in the Northwest, it does compress the development footprint a little bit. And that's what tipped this one to be the highest performer. At the end of each set of criteria, we have created these recommendations from those lessons learned. So I'll just quickly go through those. So one, residential land use should remain as a portion of the project program. This is an important, not only balanced community objective, but it does reduce car travel significantly. Create the smallest reasonable block size. Adopt the regional retail mix from concept 2 as the default retail and entertainment program. Maybe it's not the exact amount, but it's something in that magnitude. Minimize large open spaces near BRT. So we want to obviously optimize access to BRT. So to put development next to BRT as much as possible. And then we can selectively edit some of the automobile roads to create these pedestrian forward sub-districts within the plan. And again, please feel free to interrupt if you need further clarification on any of these. The second set of 5.
Peter?
Yeah.
It's April.
Hey, April.
I do have a question on that number 2, where you said create the smallest reasonable block size.
Right.
Does that end up with just a ton of roads in there? Like a ton of the acreage then goes towards asphalt basically? Or can you enlighten me a little bit as to why we want it so small?
Yeah. Again, it just has to do with the ability for people to move through the project as easily as possible. What that does by having slightly more dense road network is it gives people options about which way they can go. It also allows us to reduce the size of the roads if you have more of them. So rather than having fewer roads, but large roads, we would have slightly more, but they would be smaller. So the net road footprint is about the same. So we're not actually increasing the amount of asphalt, it's just enhancing that idea of movement through the project. And
Okay.
the block size, we're not fixed on that at this point. You know, we want to put something in the market that developers can that they want to develop. So
If I
we're
could just comment
Yeah.
you know, briefly on that. I mean, actually 400 by 400 isn't that small. It's actually a fairly, moderate to into larger scale. So I don't think it's an overstreeting the project. And the way I think about it is that if we start off with a grid that is, somewhat consistent, what's going to happen is, an office developer might come in and say, look, I want to do an 800,000 square foot campus. And it might be that he combines, two blocks to do that, or 3 blocks, just to get the parking and the office and the campus concept to really work out. So I think of it as a module that is a starting place that is going to be modified as we go forward into the real world.
Okay, that helps a lot, Steve, because I was wondering if we get down to these, and again, I wasn't reading the 400 by 400. My mind was really swayed by that smallest reasonable block. Then I started thinking, oh, are we, shooting ourselves in the foot if we have someone that wants to come and make this a headquarters and needs several blocks? And are there some roads where we can keep from the average little car coming in there if we have, let's say electric self-driving buses or something? So I just needed some clarification on what we meant by smallest reasonable block size.
And the other thing that can happen is if an office developer comes in and wants to take two or 3 blocks down, the connectivity that Peter is trying to achieve, can still be there. It just would be more pedestrian, instead of maybe asphalt. And so there's that's the main goal, is creating that connectivity.
Right. And encourage walking and other things too. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's also starting to occur downtown Salt Lake. There's been some movement towards reducing the block size in terms of the porosity of those blocks.
So Peter?
Yeah.
Excuse me, just a question going back to these recommendations. I know we're going to try to appeal to different sectors. Is this the direction we're going? Is this a plan that appeals to and embraced by when we think of the technology sector and the folks that work in those areas? Are these the things they're looking for?
These recommendations really are from the SOM team. And I think part of the purpose of the next 3 meetings with the board is to discuss the recommendations. So we're not saying these are locked in any manner. I do think we need to vet these against you all's opinions and approaches to the project. Absolutely. And at some point, I think there will be conversations with developers about, do these work for the developers? But I think these are generic enough and reasonable that most developers would find these not objectionable.
I think the one thing that developers might add to this list would be the opportunity for flexibility, and not to be too locked in, that they have the ability to modify and morph, the grid, as we were talking about before, to achieve, their own unique aspirations, for a campus area. And our experience in some of the larger campus approaches in Silicon Valley and elsewhere has been, a move towards more pedestrian-oriented environments, and less auto dominant. And I think that's built into this, but that would be the other thing. We did hear in some of our working groups the bringing back up the issue of a additional commuter rail station closer to the site. That seems to be sort of popping its head up periodically. True. And not, that the BRT is fantastic, but having a second station closer to the site would actually be an enhancement.
On the front runner tracks. Yeah.
And we're not that far. Are we from the front runner?
No. So there is a portion of the site that actually touches the front runner tracks right here. So the working groups just said, let's not take that off the table right now. That potential future connection. There's some operational concerns about the spacing of this station with Draper, which is about 1.25 miles up the tracks. But yeah.
What I was gonna add to that is, from the Draper Front Runner Station to this site, when we built the bridge over Bangerter and into the transit-oriented development site where eBay is, there's an underpass that even a light rail vehicle could fit through. There'd be no problem to make the bus rapid transit go from the Draper Front Runner site all the way through to this site. You'd be able to connect it very easily without having to try and mess with a new front runner station. We
Draper
kind of designed it in there that way.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, it was something that was raised, I think, in the transportation working group.
That was actually where you're showing the site touches the front runner track, is where originally it was going to stop, but there was some controversial lands that were sacred to Native Americans, and so I don't think you're ever going to be able to put a front runner stop anywhere near that area with the run. But the BRT would certainly be doable from front runner right all the way through very easily.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there you can see where the site touches the front runner.
Sorry, I have too much history with that whole process. I know.
It's okay. The second set of criteria are around the idea of community. And this really looks at how each concept is performing against really connection within the project and again, meeting daily needs of both the workers and the residents. So in this one, we just measured access to retail. So if you recall those core drawings that I showed earlier, where we have retail cores in different locations in the plan, this is measuring the distance or the percentage of population that's within a 5-minute walk of one of those cores. They all do quite well, but actually the regional hub, again, because of that slightly more compressed development footprint, actually everybody who lives here would be within a 5-minute walk of a core area. The other ones do very well as well, but that's consistent with the overall vision of the project of being a walkable environment and a compact environment. Another interesting metric is the jobs housing balance, which is this graphic here. So you can see we measured the job count for each of the 3 concepts. So concept 1 had about 31,000. It has the highest number of households, about 7,200. So that is a jobs to housing ratio of about 4.39. And just for reference, in the Salt Lake region, the average is around 1.6. So we have significantly more jobs per households on this project than, say, the Salt Lake region as a whole. But that's, again, consistent with the vision of this being a jobs and economic catalyst. So if you go to the other end of the scale, the economic catalyst, of course, has the highest jobs per household at 6.48, about 37,000 jobs with about 5,700 households. So we like to see that balance again. So the idea that you can live here and work here. So we did indicate that concept 1 was the highest performing. The next 2 criteria just simply measured the idea of access to these hubs from all the land. So not just the residential land, but actually all of the land. And again, concept 2 performed the best, with about 93.5% of the development area within a 5-minute walk. And then the last of these kind of access diagrams, this just measures the percentage of land within a 5-minute walk of the center of the project. So how long does it take for someone to get to the center? And concept 2 performed the best. The fifth community criteria measured pretty simple metric, which is the acreage of the retail and hotel functions. And the reason we wanted to make this measurement was simply to assess the ability of the project to provide this regional retail area and meet that goal of the program. And concept 2 did perform the best in this option, as you can see. So some of the takeaways on community criteria: maintain that residential and non-residential mix, implement a land use mix that creates the best proportion of jobs to housing, implement multiple sub-centers to meet daily needs and reduce driving, and concentrate the development footprint. We're suggesting 50 to 55% of the overall site area, which is consistent with what you're seeing here, to maximize the links to the project center, and then include a significant retail, hotel, and entertainment component, which again reduces off-site car travel. The third grouping measured sustainability criteria. These are a little bit more technical and maybe better suited or can be optimized in stage 3. But this measures what we call solar access. So this is just the ability of the plan and the building design to provide solar. This is an important part of our sustainability strategy. So concept 2 provided a slightly enhanced solar access number. But again, we think in stage 3, we can make all, whatever the concept is that moves forward, perform well. We also measured daylight access. This is, again, a solar metric that measures the ability to provide daylight into buildings. And again, this will be a function optimized best in stage 3 when we get into building design. But concept 2 in this test fit that we ran did perform the best. The third sustainable criteria is important because it impacts air quality, and this is the overall vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And this is measuring the traffic impacts of the plan on the regional road network. And as you can see, the complete community performed slightly better than the others, but remarkably, they're all very similar, about 87.9 million vehicle miles traveled. We think that they're so similar because when you look at this on a regional scale, the nuances in the land use mix don't have a significant impact on overall VMT. The fourth sustainable criteria is the ability of the plan to accommodate stormwater management and water conservation ideas. Concept 1 really was designed to do that, so it did perform the best, with about 15 acres of stormwater management potential and a significantly greater amount of linear feet of stormwater conveyance. And why this is important is one of our objectives for the project is to demonstrate water conservation in a very tangible way. This had a lot of resonance with the public meetings and the working groups. So concept 1 did perform the best on that. And then the fifth sustainable criteria, again, is really having to do with bike and pedestrian connectivity to, again, enhance the way people move through the project. And what this measured is we subdivided the site into these 350 by 350 squares, and then we measured the ease of moving by either sidewalks or trails from one square to another. And the red color indicates these have the highest degree of connectivity to other parts of the project. So in this evaluation criteria, concept 1 did slightly better, and we think that had to do with the more extensive trail network in that open space system. So some of the takeaways on sustainability were to really optimize building orientation and height in the next stage. Again, maintain that residential, non-residential mix in terms of VMT. And then a portion of the open spaces should be specifically designated to manage and conserve stormwater, and then designed for connectivity between trails and sidewalks. So that starts to perform as a network. 2 more groups. I'll go through these pretty quick. This measured open space. This simply measures distance to open space. And why this is important is we know from our research on innovation districts that having access to open space amenities is very important to tech workers. So in this instance, concept 1 performed the best, but they're all doing quite well. And we think, again, this is a metric that we can optimize in the next phase. We also measure the ability of the open spaces to be programmed. And concept 2 had the most programmable, we felt, open spaces. So again, these are saying, what can we actually use these parks for? Do they provide specific activities that are of value to the people that live here? So concept 2 did well. And then trail connectivity, as I mentioned, concept 1 had the highest level of trail connectivity. And this is not only recreational in nature, but also speaks to how people might get to work or to school. The 4th criteria for open space had to do with biodiversity potential. We think it's important that the project exhibit a high level of ecological diversity and biodiversity. And in this case, option 2 seemed to do the best. And then the final criteria for open space was, again, proximity, but this was measured by percent of the land that is proximate to open space. So in this criteria, concept 2 did quite well. Oh, but they all did well. And we think this has commercial advantages as well, that we know that parcels are usually more highly valued if there is some sort of open space amenity nearby. So the recommendations from open space is to mix the park and open space programming, create those opportunities for native landscaping and stormwater, and then make sure that that park and greenway network is proximate to development and other parcels. And then the final grouping of criteria was the economics. We started by looking at the percentage of land with green frontage, and we know that this has a direct correlation with sales with land value, and they all do quite well, with about 40 to 45% of the all development parcels having some sort of green frontage or open space frontage, with number 2 slightly better than the others. The 3rd economic criteria was the housing quantity. And in this case, option 1 or concept 1 did the best. And it's not simply a matter of the amount, but we felt it also provided the most opportunity for variety of housing types. And we know from our analysis of surrounding communities that higher density housing, workforce type housing is needed in the area, and that correlates well with concept 1, but can be equally applied to the other concepts. This metric just looked at the institutional or innovation hub capacity. So of course, concept 3 did the best. It has the highest percentage of institutional and innovation districts. And then the last one was simply measuring the office quantity and variety. So again, concept 3 did the best. So these were the 25 metrics. I know that was a lot of information at one time, but we were able to then roll these up into a single set of numbers. And again, just touching on some of the economic recommendations, we really want to optimize and create variety in the program mix. I think that's the key takeaway here from this study. And then also that adjacency to open space. As I said, we were able to then summarize the scoring, which you can see here. And again, because of the methodology of the scoring, it tended to exaggerate things a little bit in terms of just having a 3-2-1 score. But it did reveal pretty clearly that concept 2 does perform well in the first 3 categories, the best. In terms of open space, concept 1 and 2 were tied. And in terms of economic potential, concept 3, no surprise, since it was the design to perform well, performed the best in that economic tranche. And then I think what was interesting to us is that concept 2 did seem to provide the highest scores in most categories and emerged as the concept that aligned with most of the criterias in the best way. But again, as I mentioned, many of the scoring criteria were quite close, and we think in stage 3 we can optimize any of the concepts to perform well around many of these metrics. So this really is a snapshot of where we are right now, not meant to be a definitive evaluation of the site potential. So happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions of the board? This this scoring, this evaluation is really helpful. I'm guessing that this is what you do in helping evaluate projects, but I think where we have put you to the task of taking all of the issues into consideration in the plan, not just highest and best use and biggest return financially, but all of those other intangibles, so to speak, as well.
Yeah.
This is really helpful, Peter.
Maybe one comment
Yeah.
I'd make, this scoring process, as we said, it's not perfect, and it doesn't include any weighting. And part of what the board can do is decide which of these factors and others are more important than others, and we'll consider those as well as we move into the next stage of planning.
Yeah.
It's a really important point. So Peter, when on that last category of economy, when we talk about that, how generally are we defining that? What does that mean?
Well, the way we've defined it here is simply the capacity of the plan to perform at a high level in terms of economic indicators. And the way we measured that was through acreage, frankly. But the acreage also is a determinant of not just pure capacity, but also the ability of the plan to accommodate different users or different, say, types of residential. So it really creates the most possibilities for the plan, which I think is very important. especially in our planning, where we are in the planning process right now. We want to really create a plan that opens up the most avenues around this innovation mission. So that really was the objective of that last group.
If this was a private development and primarily, if not entirely, profit motivated, would we primarily be looking at that scoring on the economy? Are we looking if we're looking for the maximum monetary return?
Steve, do you want to address that?
I think that might be better for me to jump in on, Pete.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Erin. I think that we are analyzing all three of these scenarios to understand what that monetary return looks like with the cost. And so it's balancing both the cost variable that Pete included for the infrastructure, as well as what we would be putting on our future development partners and the value of the land as the return is generated. Based on our preliminary modeling, my expectation is that concepts 2 and 3 will look the best.
Okay, and Aaron and group, I'm not advocating for that. I'm trying to understand how that plays against the other items that are scored.
Right, that's not explicitly in here yet. We're hoping that we'll be able to add that variable probably the next work session.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to note that I didn't include it here, but we did create a cost estimate on all three. And in that criteria, concept 3 did perform the best. And what we found generally was that the higher percentage of open space did tend to drive up the development cost overall. And at the appropriate time, Alan or Aaron, we probably should share those numbers with the board. But I think the key takeaway is, one, they were all quite close, but also, there's a cost to open space. However, there's a benefit to open space because we know that the tech and innovation workers that we're trying to attract do highly value those amenities. So it's a balance and a trade-off that I think Aaron and Steve and the client team are looking at quite carefully right now.
So Representative Snow, I have a couple comments, if that'd be all right.
Absolutely.
So I really like the effort that we've all gone to, and the scoring in that is great. When you have 3 concept and one is on one extreme and the other is on the other, and then the number 2 is in the middle, I would have expected that through the scoring right now that concept 2 would definitely be the one that would be the best of both worlds, right? When we've been going through this process, you've mentioned that, some of that it could be a mix of these and not necessarily either 1, 2, or 3, that we could take elements from one and apply it to another.
Mm-hmm.
I think the heavy work right now needs to be in determining, do we want to do that? And then also, as Alan had mentioned, or Representative Snow, whoever it was, weighting on certain elements or which elements are more important to us. I think it will make the scoring process a lot more valuable, enable us to come to a lot better decision. I mean, right now, the framework's there and it showed us exactly what we would expect to see. Now we've got to do a little bit of heavy lifting and determine what's most important to us. And my question is, how do we get to that? Especially given the constraints of meeting offline and then once a month or every couple weeks meeting with the board and presenting information. Seems like we need to have a process that's going to expedite those decisions a lot quicker than what we're getting right now.
A good point, Jim, especially with kind of an ambitious timeline we have going. Some good points. Other comments from members of the board? Do you like the way this is going? Do you like these concepts?
Oh, absolutely. We're on track. Absolutely.
Okay.
Senator Stevenson, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Senator.
Thank you. I'm not going to come on board. I've been out in the wind all morning, and I look like I've been out in the wind all morning. So, and my tie is wrinkled. I think we're really on the right track with what we're doing. I mean, all of these have got great possibilities, and you know, the scores are really close together on in most of the areas we're talking about. So I compliment our planner on what we put together and what we're doing here. Compliment the board, certainly. We're going to have opportunity, I think, in the near future to maybe look at some funding. We'll see what the new CARES money brings to us. But I think we will certainly, as a state, look at that in the form of projects and not programs. If we fund programs, we'll certainly be trying to figure out how to continue them in a year or two. So we want to be careful and focus on things that we feel we can accomplish and that will give great value back to the taxpayer of the state of Utah. But we are really on the right track. This is impressive. I've been here most of the meeting. JC finally figured out how to get me on after I got out of the wind. So appreciate you very much and appreciate what's going on here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And we don't know yet how all of that COVID relief is going to play out, but this may be good timing and a discussion at some point we can have with the board as we move forward. But there actually may be things that will work out that Senator Stevenson alluded to. More comments about the direction. Anyone not feel like this is the right direction we're headed?
This is April. I think that we believe this is the right direction to head based on all the best information that we've had available so far. We've certainly had great input from RCLCO, from our board members, and Alan directing us, and Steve being involved, and then of course now with SOM. However, we haven't really included, and because we really couldn't yet, we couldn't pick a couple developers before we go through a process to see if everything that we're going to do is potentially going to work or potentially pencil, then we're really relying on like the numbers from RCLCO. So I am glad that we're going forward with this RFEI, because I think once we also start to get the developers and or remember if we have some companies that are interested in headquartering there, it'd be good to have a little bit more opinions so they don't come in and try to scrap everything we've done or say this just isn't going to work with a private public partnership. So it's good that we're going forward with that so that we're not all sitting in a room, all of us not developers, and then developing out this land. So I like that we're still calling it concepts and then we're still just working on the framework of it.
Really good points, April, and a good lead into discussion when we get back to that agenda item, because now having gone through this, I think, at least for me and maybe for some of you, can see the value in the work that Alan's done with the request for interest, which includes feedback from developers, and we may get feedback from them that says that this isn't feasible or that is, or maybe make suggestions on things that could be changed. And I think Peter and Steve have all made it clear that these are all preliminary and can be modified. But that's a good point, April. Further discussion?
Representative Snow, if I might jump in just a couple of points. First of all, on that last one, we are reaching out to developers, and I think I've mentioned in the past that we've also got a list of people at the kinds of companies that we would like to target, and we're reaching out to them in the next few weeks to get their input too on what would make this an appealing place for them. To Senator Stevenson's comments, there has been work done on the costs here, and part of that, we have wondered about some of that federal funding being a place to start. We've divided the costs into various tranches. One is some of the regional costs that might be involved with the transportation systems like the BRT. Tranche 2 is costs that we would expect from a master developer for the key infrastructure at the site, the major roads, the major water systems, utilities, green infrastructure, et cetera. And then some costs that would be incurred by the district level developers to develop out each of those districts. And then finally, some costs associated with the final builders on buildings. So we will share that with you at the next meeting. And as Aaron said, hope that we'll have some of the revenue numbers too, that I think will be really a good starting point for our discussion at the next meeting.
Alan, Jerry again. I think this is what I was referring to. We need to determine which of those or what brings value to the taxpayer in the state of Utah. But we know that we've got to dispose of, there's a couple of buildings on site that the state is using. We've got to get those either moved or relocated, those agencies. We know that anything we could do as far as mass transit or water lines, sewer lines, all of those things, they definitely bring value because they'll bring an increased value to the real estate or an increased value to the taxpayer in some, maybe that's just measured in speed with which we can get something done there and get a return back. So I really believe we're on track with what we're doing. I congratulate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator and Alan. There is, I get every once in a while glimpses in my conversations with Alan at how much is going on that he's taking care of behind the scenes with all of the working groups, with all of the folks that he's meeting with. There is a great deal, and it seems to be getting heavier in terms of his involvement. So we appreciate him, but there is a lot to this. There's a lot that's gone into it. There's a great deal yet to do, but I feel really good about the direction of things. Peter, we're glad that your team is on board, and Aaron and Steve, grateful for your expertise. I feel really good about things, and I may be wrong about how the federal COVID relief will pan out and what we can do, but I in many ways, and I don't know how you feel about this, Senator Stevenson, but this could be very fortuitous timing, and that adds to my I think my level of excitement. Anything further?
Can I just ask a question on that? Will there be an expectation of that funding being expensed by like the end of 2024 or something like that, that might make it problematic for some of the long-term aspects of this project?
It's a good question, and I don't have the answer. And Alan, I don't know whether you know or Senator Stevenson enough that can respond and to that.
Well, I do understand that they're looking for this to be spent by 2024, and as we look at the timeline, that moving the buildings from the site, doing some of the demolition, some of that first phase of major infrastructure, I mean, all of that theoretically could be done by 2024. So it might fit that criterion.
And I would just add possibly the demolition of all the structures on site as well.
Yeah, I agree.
So we may be getting, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I believe you're all right on track with that. We haven't seen the final rules yet. I think we'll have them within the next 2 weeks on how this spend can go. But I believe the one thing that we need to keep in mind is if we do things wisely with projects that we need to take care of in our state, that should free up money in the future for some of the things that we have, unless we get over exuberant about tax cuts or something. But it should cause us to have more money and more state funding in the future to put into things that we need. So that's why we need to be very careful about how we handle this.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments or questions before we move on? All right. Well, Peter, thank you again for your presentation and for your assistance as our consultant.
You're welcome.
The next item on our agenda, item number 4, is the discussion of planning concepts, and we've already had that somewhat underway. But before we get to that, what I'd like to do is go back to item number 2. We were gathering a quorum before we could take action on that. And April, thank you for taking time to review that. I believe we still have a quorum. And I would like to move back to that item to see if we can take action. And I would certainly entertain a motion. But before I do that, are there any questions or comments going back to that item that you might have for Alan as he described this expression of interest, the request for expression of interest that he's proposing that we adopt so that that process can move forward?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, I apologize. I was having some connectivity issues earlier, so sincerest apologies for wasting your guys' time and going back to this. So I just wanted to see if anyone had asked or to clarify that there will be no extra points in the RFP or RFQ process for somebody that participated in the RFEI, because we keep saying right now that the RFEI is kind of high level. And so I'd hate for us later on to all of a sudden say that they get extra or something because they participated at the beginning. Did anyone address that?
Yes, we've said in the document that participation in this round is not a prerequisite to participating in the RFQ, RFP. They're separate. And so this is really just a way to get public input or developer input in an open, transparent way. So it's really an information exchange. And then late summer, early fall, or whenever the time is right, we'll go through a really formalized RFQ, RFP process. Okay.
Then on number 3 on that criteria, we put firm longevity and depth of experience of key members. If I was evaluating, I would say the depth of experience of the key members and or firm longevity, because I really have no problem if people have like left firms that they've worked with and go to start their own firm and they have lots and lots of experience, but for some reason the firm is, let's say, a year or 2 old as opposed to 20 years old. To me, that doesn't preclude them being able to be successful or do a good job. So I don't know the best way to state that, but to me, it's not just the longevity of the firm. It's really all the people that are doing this. And they may have, more recently created a better firm by a couple of different people leaving firms that they used to be with. So I don't really know how to state that well, but.
Go
ahead.
Ellen, let me ask you about that. How do you feel about that? And could that adjustment be made?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I think I said earlier, this is a work in progress and we've got many eyes still looking at it. So we intend to make some edits, and we're not looking for your approval of the document itself. We're looking for your approval of the process to finish up the RFEI and send it out this week if you're comfortable with that.
Okay, then the last thing I had was just a tiny bit on the timeline. So we put April 1st for putting out the RFEI, which is this Thursday, to have them do questions by April 5th, which is Monday after the holiday, after Easter weekend. And then April 7th, we will respond back to the questions. And then we put April 12th, which is a Monday, for them to respond. Can we give that to like maybe like the 14th or 15th, a couple more days after those questions come out? Because I want to make sure that we have enough groups that, you know, if we're kind of asking them to participate voluntarily, that we're not like crunching it in. And I know we're trying to move along the timeline, but I'm wondering if maybe we can have it do more like in the middle of the week, like a Wednesday or Thursday, so we can hopefully open it up to as many groups as we can.
Certainly can, and this is a very tight time frame. We know that. We're kind of late in the process getting this started, and want to be able to get the input as we're developing these framework plans. But a couple of days wouldn't matter that much. One of the things I said earlier was that we've tried to structure this so the information we're requesting is the kind of thing they should have on the shelf. And their marketing team could probably put together a response in an hour or two based on materials already prepared and send it in. So we don't think it'll be overly onerous, but you make a really good point. It makes sense to give them enough time to think about it. And for some of the firms that may not hear about it on day one, to give them a couple of days to look at the website and find that. So yes,
Thank you.
We can make that change.
Thanks.
Thank you, April. And Alan, you can accommodate that as well in the final.
You bet.
Alan, can you give us some idea of how many in this first wave or in this group that you intend to send out? How many you anticipate?
Well, if Erin's there, maybe she's got the number, but we've probably got somewhere around 15 to 20 nationally and 8 to 10 in Utah, something along those lines.
I
Okay.
just pulled up my list to count. We've got about 45 firms, including some good local candidates that we're going to send this out to. And our expectation is some of these firms will say, oh, it's a really cool project. It's a little bit outside of our geographic footprint, or there's another reason that they aren't interested right now. So I think we'll get some really good responses, and we've got a really rich set of groups to send it out to.
Yeah, and it's been a good team effort to develop that list with RCLCO, Steve, SOM, and I put some in. And so I hope we haven't missed any key ones, but we will have an opportunity for any firm to participate.
Good. And April, let me just say on the first point you made, when we get to the point where we actually issue RFPs, you can help, and I'll help make sure that we don't include that as additional points for anyone that has participated in this first process, because I think that's a good point. So with that, I would entertain a motion so that our director, executive director, can move forward with this process.
So I would make a motion, Representative Snow.
That's in order.
I would make a motion that we allow Alan Matheson to post the RFEI after some adjustments are made. But I would just add one requirement that the procurement code requires 7 days from the time you post to the first thing that we can require of them, which in this case would be a question period. Although I don't think we necessarily have to comply with that, I think it's a good rule of thumb to allow for people to look at it and to respond reasonably. So I would motion that we go ahead and post the RFEI after other comments that they've received have been incorporated, but we do it with a minimum of 7 days from posting to a first required response.
Okay, let me see if I can restate. The motion is that we allow our director to move forward in posting the RFEI, subject to including the issues or the matters that were raised by April, and also subject to the condition that we allow 7 days before someone responding is required to respond. Is that your motion?
Yeah, he's received comments other than just April's, so just incorporating any of them.
I think that he did, yes. So any of those that were made and can be incorporated, Alan. Discussion to that motion. Do I have a second to the motion? I should have asked. Is that you, Mayor?
Yes.
From Mayor Walker. And now discussion to the motion and second. Not seeing hands and no one speaking up, I'll place it for a vote. All in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. The motion carries, and we'll ask you to move forward accordingly. Thank you, Alan. So we're to the last item on the agenda, which was the board discussion of the planning concepts, kind of an extension of the discussion we were having through Q&A. But Alan, would you mind directing this discussion and see if there's additional comments?
Be happy to. So, the way that we've structured this, we've looked at the April 13th board meeting as the time for you to give us specific direction on the preferred alternative that will be developed as part of our stage 3. And so to get there, today was really about providing you information you can think about and get some discussion. At our meeting next week, we'll target a lot more getting into some of the details. And as Jim said, have a formal process for helping to evaluate the weight we give to different factors and what elements you want to see go forward or elements you won't. But before we wrap up today, we just want to make sure that you've got the information that you need, or that we've captured your initial thoughts that we can incorporate into preparing for the next meeting. Anything else that you'd like to share with us? Well, what we have received has been very helpful, and really appreciate the input. And I think if you've got some comments or ideas and would like to send a text or an email, you can feel free to do that too before the next meeting.
Good suggestion.
Alan, I've got a question, or maybe just a comment. A lot of the elements I think that we can all comment on and give our opinion, but as far as the economic considerations, what is ultimately going to be the most important for the governor's office and for the legislature? Is it worth it? Or, I mean, should all of the members of the board comment on that or give our opinion? I'm just, I'm unsure of what the intent of the executive and legislative branch would be for, return on investment here. I mean, what's the most important? Yeah. How important is it?
Yeah, I think getting some input from the board would be important on that. And my guess is that it's going to be a really critical factor because so many people want the answer to that. So we will have by next week some numbers to give you, and they are based just on these concepts. The hope is that as we start narrowing the field a little bit and get to a preferred alternative, then we'll be able to dive in and get some more accurate numbers. So over time, the numbers will get more accurate, but we're going to be able to give you, I think, a good overview of kind of the costs and generally what we could expect is the return on the development concepts. And I think you're asking though, how important is that to members of the board? Is that right?
Well, it seems like that will probably be what governs the decisions for the most part, but I'm not sure that it's a question that most of the board members can answer, right? It's a lot broader question on what will be the ultimate emphasis or economic drive behind this project, because however we did, if it's, you know, job creation or tax revenue or whatever becomes the highest priority or is deemed most important, that will have a big effect on what the plan is going forward. And I can't answer that question. I can say I like more green space or less green space. I like transit being available or any of those type of decisions. But the economic ones, as I look at that, I don't really know how to respond other than personal opinion.
It's a good point. It is a challenge. You have so many people looking at this in different ways, and we've got objectives that have been laid out for us. And sometimes those objectives are somewhat contradictory. And I think you've identified the real challenge for the board, and that is identifying what are the key concepts, what's most important, how do we weight these various factors, and how do we resolve the inevitable trade-offs in planning decisions.
So to be able to move the ball forward and have a good discussion and maybe decide something on the 12th, I'm just bringing this up. How do we get some information or background on the economic aspects of it? Do we need that by the 12th to really determine the direction moving forward?
And as I said, I think we will have, we plan to have some next week at our interim meeting. So you'll get at least what we've got at this point and can discuss that. We would hope that based on the input we get from you at the next meeting, our team will be able to go back and put together some specific recommendations for what ought to be carried forward into this stage 3 preferred alternative. Then at the meeting on the 13th, we'll present those recommendations to you, have a discussion, and see if they align with where you as a board are. And then we can start turning those concepts into planning ideas on the map.
Yeah. Sorry for being pushed to you. That's just my nature and disposition and job hazard, right? Try to keep things moving forward on schedule and on budget. So I think we just, I feel the pressure, and I hope everybody else does, to try to make some decisions and move this project forward.
Great points. Absolutely agree.
And I do too, Jim. And that is, like Alan says, that is our challenge. But I think what I'm hopeful is by the time we get to the meeting on the 13th, that we'll have more information and be able to make a intelligent decision, I believe. Which leads me to the last thing, I guess, before we take a motion to adjourn, and that is the upcoming meetings become really important if we can make them. This next meeting on the 7th, as well as the meeting on the 13th. You're tired of hearing me saying this, but it's pivotal. It's an important meeting because we are narrowing the framework of what the plan is going forward. And Jim, I hope that we have the information that will help us make that decision and a way that we can respond to citizens of the state. So with that, is there any other final comments or questions from board members?
I have one comment.
Okay.
Alan, do you or Cece, does anyone need some help in maybe throwing out a quick phone call to the board members that weren't available today to kind of give them like a 5 or 10 minute recap and then remind them of the meetings coming up so that we can have really good turnout? I'm happy to help with that if we need.
Say, it sounded like we just had a volunteer to do that.
I will. Just like, I don't know. I'm just thinking maybe give them a 5 or 10 minute recap so that they know like we've got so much stuff going on these right now.
It would be it'd be useful for everybody to be aware so they're up to speed. And yeah, we can certainly facilitate that.
Okay, let me know if you need me to make any of those calls, and they'll just be quick, like 5 or 6 minutes. But I think that kind of helps each other, for all of us to know what the others of us were thinking and stay on top of it.
I think we just had 2 members of the board who were not with us today. So
Oh, okay.
that wouldn't be too onerous, and we'd be happy to do that.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you again, all of you, for attending, board members and our consultants, members of the public. Thank you for your interest. And with that, I would entertain a final motion from a board member.
Alan, could I make,
Adjourn.
Laura, could I make a statement or just a comment before we leave? You know,
Yes.
I've been talking to some developers, and certainly I think what we're putting together here is what I would classify as a legacy project. There's a lot of developers like to get into those toward the end of their career. But Larry, as I've watched you work, kind of wind our way through this, I think this is kind of legacy legislation for you. I think this is something you'll be able to hang your hat on. Your family will be able to hang their hat on for a long, long time. So my compliments to you. You're a great gentleman, and I appreciate the way you conduct the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate you saying that. But I will also say that the real hard work and heavy lifting is being done by the board, and you're probably tired of hearing me say this too, but I just want you to know how incredibly fortunate we are to have Alan helping lead this, and with our consultant team. I hope you all recognize, board members, that we're entering in uncharted territory in undertaking this in our state. And we couldn't do this. Given my experience in representing developers down here on some very large projects, what we've done that I've worked on is nothing compared to the magnitude of this. And to all of you board members who were engaged, and to our consultants, we couldn't do this without your help. And JC, legal counsel, we appreciate all that you're doing too behind the scenes. Anyway, with that, I'd entertain a final motion.
Move to adjourn too.
Thank you, Representative Handy. Do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thanks, April. All in favor, say aye.
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 We stand adjourned. Thank you all.